Hey, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. It's your girl Simran, as always. And today we're going to be talking about video interviews. So you have done your applications, you've done your online tests, congratulations. If the online test is something that you're still struggling with, be sure to check out my Instagram page because I have recently posted a how I improved my Watson Glaser test post, which many people did find useful and you could too. So I just wanted to talk about some general thoughts first of all on how I found video interviews, and I actually didn't mind them as much as telephone interviews or Skype interviews, mainly because we were actually given like 30 seconds or a minute or so to actually formulate our answer before we record our response. The main body of this video is split into two sections. Firstly, I'll be talking about how to prepare for a video interview. And this includes highlighting some key questions that law firms typically ask. The next section will be about what you can do just before you start your video interview, or what you can do during your video interview to maximize your chances of getting through to the next stage. Firstly, let's talk about how to prepare for a video interview. So it's completely fair to say that this is where your research becomes very, very important. Not only about the firm, but you yourself as a person, and about commercial awareness and the world in general. I would also like to say that structure is very, very important. In video interviews, you're typically given a minute or even less than that to answer your questions. Therefore, you need to go straight to the point and need to be concise. The worst thing in a video interview is when you've got 10 seconds left and you've not even finished the first part of your answer, and your answer gets cut off near the end because you've not finished in the time limit. So therefore, what you can do to mitigate this issue from occurring is actually record yourself answering certain questions. I know this is hella awkward. I hate watching my own YouTube videos back, let alone recording myself for a video interview. However, by recording yourself, you're not only setting yourself time limits to answer a question in 1 minute, for example, you're also looking at how your body language is like on camera. Now, I've split the certain questions that firms can ask into 5 sections. Firstly, there can be questions about you. Secondly, there can be questions about your application to the firm and your career choice. Thirdly, there can be questions about the firm itself. Then there can be questions about your competencies if it's a competency-based interview, or your strengths if it's a strengths-based interview. And then lastly, there can be questions about commercial awareness. So firstly, let's talk about questions about you. Let me provide you sample questions that firms can ask about you as a person. They can ask you questions like, tell us about yourself. Certain people get thrown off by this question because they don't know what to include in it. However, I tend to include a brief statement first of all about who I am and where I am in the process. So for example, my name is Simranjeet Kaur, I'm 23 years old and I am a law graduate from the University of Bristol. Then you can go on to talk about your experiences, be it legal or non-legal, and then you can also talk about your hobbies and interests. So certain interests of mine include playing football or swimming. And then you can also talk about your personal achievements or any positions of responsibilities you held. Other questions you may get that focus on you as a person include, describe yourself in 3 words and why have you chosen these words? What makes you happy? What are your pet peeves? What do you do in your spare time? What are your hobbies and interests? What are your strengths or weaknesses? In terms of that latter question of what are your weaknesses, loads of people tend to struggle with this kind of question. What I would really recommend is being honest first of all. You don't want to be that person who's like, oh yeah, my weakness is I work too hard. Like, come on man, like that is not genuine in any way. Obviously try and be open and genuine about your weaknesses, but try not to pick a quality that the firm is actually looking for in their trainees, because then that can actually just backfire really badly. And then in that section of your answer, also talk about how you're going about improving yourself following that weakness. So provide practical examples. Say if you're someone who lacks confidence, for example, you can say that you're someone who's attended public speaking classes, or you've put yourself in situations where you want to speak in front of audiences to overcome that confidence issue. Now let's move on to the second type of questions you could get in a video interview, and that's questions about your application and why you've chosen your career path. So certain questions like this could be, why have you chosen to become a commercial lawyer? Why have you decided to apply to this firm? Why do you want to work in the city? What qualities should a successful lawyer have? And in that kind of question, actually, I will talk about the qualities that a successful lawyer should have. But if I have time, I'd also weave in how those qualities relate to me as a person as well. Another question you could be asked is, if you were a trainee at this firm, what would you do to stand out and why? And another question a firm could ask you is, why should we pick you? What makes you stand out? What is your USP? Now, the next set of example questions you could get from law firms relate to the firm itself. For example, questions like, who are our competitors? How do we remain competitive? If you had to tell a client one USP about the firm, what would it be? If you had to introduce a new client to the firm, who would it be and why? If you could build a new office anywhere for this firm, where would you pick and why? What practice area in this law firm interests you the most and why? The next few questions you could get in your video interview are about your competencies or your strengths. Usually the law firm specifies in the email holding your invitation to the video interview where they state that you'll be completing a competency interview or a strengths-based interview. And if you're unsure, perfectly fine to email Grad Recruitment and ask them. Let me quickly explain what the difference is between competency interviews and strengths interviews. Competency interviews tend to find out the skills and the previous experiences that you've had that show that you can overcome certain challenges or tasks or problems. And when it comes to competency-based questions, I would really recommend going on the firm's website and looking at what they are specifically looking for in their trainee solicitors. So sometimes they say, oh, we're looking for trainees who are resilient, or we're looking for trainees who are leaders. And then what you should do in your preparation is make sure that you have aligned certain experiences to show that particular competency. So tell us about a time where you have been resilient, or tell us about a time where you have shown leadership. That's one way in which you can predict the kind of questions that the firm could ask if it was a competency-based interview. Other examples of competency interviews include, tell us about a time you worked well in a team, tell us about a time where you persuaded someone to see your point of view, but also what I did when I was preparing for video interviews was also consider the flip side argument. So tell us about a time where you didn't work well in a team, or tell us about a time where you didn't persuade someone to see your point of view. And those are the kind of questions that tend to catch people out because you have to kind of portray yourself in a vulnerable position. But again, like I've said for the question of what are your weaknesses, make sure you go into detail about how you improved yourself after the situation, just to show that you're someone who doesn't take these kind of things as setbacks, but you're someone who learns from the experience. Strengths-based interviews, on the other hand, focus on what you enjoy doing. So in the video interview, you could be asked questions like, what motivates you? What energizes you? How would your friends describe you? Now, you could also get questions about commercial awareness in your video interview. So you get the typical questions like, tell us about a recent news story and why it interested you. In respect of that question, actually, what I want to say is a lot of people talk about the recent news story, but they don't go into detail about that, why it interested you or why it resonated with you. So do make sure that you've got this kind of story clued up beforehand, but also you know personal links to how this story has interested you. So you can link it back to a university module that you read, you can link it back to a podcast that you've listened to. I'd also recommend preparing various different news stories available. For example, certain law firms have had absolutely enough of hearing about Brexit, or hearing about the coronavirus, or hearing about legal tech, so they could actually ask in the video interview, tell us about a recent news story, in brackets, please, not coronavirus related. So do make sure that you've got various different recent news stories planned. Other commercial awareness based questions you could be asked in a video interview are, what are the current opportunities and threats facing law firms or facing this firm in particular? Tell us about a business or a company that you admire. And what's the biggest challenge facing law firms in the next 5 to 10 years? Now, these example questions that I've mentioned in this interview are definitely a good start, but don't think that just because I've mentioned these questions, they will definitely come up in the video interview. There could be further questions that I've not mentioned in this video that could come up. Now let's move on to the second section of this video, and it's about advice on what to do just before you're about to start your video interview and what you should do during your a video interview to maximize your chances of getting through to the next stage. Here are some quick fire tips to help you out. Firstly, have a copy of your CV or your application in front of you. This is because under time pressures, you may forget what certain experiences you want to talk about for certain questions. Therefore, having your CV or application in front of you means that you've got everything there, and in case you forget, you can actually lean on this for inspiration. Next, I would make sure there is no mirror behind you, because if you're doing professional top half and PJ second half, oh, that was difficult, mad acrobatics and that. But yeah, if you're doing that kind of dress code like I am right now and there's a mirror in front of you, you could easily get baited out. So make sure it's a neutral background, no mirrors. And make sure there's good lighting as well. This is because in bad lighting, people might not be able to make out your facial expressions or your body language, and you want it to look as professional as possible. Now, in the video interview itself, make sure you're speaking clearly, not too fast, not too slow. If you're someone like me, when I'm nervous, I tend to speak really, really fast, and people might not catch what you're saying. So make that conscious effort to slow down. Make sure there's no fidgeting either, so make sure you're not tapping your pen on the table, or like shaking your leg, because it can mean you're like moving like this maybe. No hair playing, etc. Just keep as neutral and professional and still as possible. But of course, you know, you can use your hands, you can use body language, that's perfectly fine. I would also really recommend doing the practice questions that the firm sets. So usually just when you've logged into the system for the video interview, they'll give you 1 or 2 practice questions just so you get the gist of how the system is like. I was a big idiot, right? For my first video interview, I skipped through these practice sections because I was like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And then when it got to the real thing, I was like, oh my God, wait, do I have time to record, or does it record like this, or does it work like that? So make sure you do those practice sessions properly before you do your actual interview. The next thing I would say is utilize all the time available to answer the question. And this is of course where your structure comes in. A good structure means that you're able to go through every single stage of your answer properly in the time limit set. If you finish around 10 seconds early, that's completely fine. Just make sure you click on that end record button so you're not awkwardly staring at a camera for like 10 seconds. That's just mad orcs for grad recruitment to see. A final point about video interviews, make sure you're staring right at the camera, not at the screen, because can you see me staring at the screen and me staring at the camera are completely different things. So make sure you're utilizing that as well. Now, I hope you found this video super helpful. I'm aiming for 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so please do help me out with this and click on the subscribe button below. I look forward to creating more content for you lovely lot, and I'll see you all soon.